The wind was a blade that day, sharp with the promise of snow, scouring the sparse, frozen land down to bone. Elara huddled deeper into the worn canvas of her shawl, the thin fabric offering little barrier against the biting cold that seeped into her marrow. Her hands, raw and chapped, ached with a dull, persistent throb, remnants of labor that had yielded so little. Her gaze was fixed on the small, sturdy horse in the makeshift corral, the last valuable thing she possessed, the last hope. Desperation was a bitter taste on her tongue, a constant companion since the illness had taken her father, leaving her alone with debt and the wolfish eyes of men who saw her vulnerability as opportunity. They had given her a deadline, a price they expected for the horse, a price that felt impossible, yet the alternative. She didn't allow herself to think of the alternative. Fear was a cold knot in her stomach, tight and suffocating. Every creak of the old barn, every gust of wind, sharpened her anxiety, making her flinch. She was exposed, a lone sapling in a hurricane, waiting for the inevitable snap. The world outside her small, precarious bubble felt vast and indifferent, a gray expanse of hardship and cold. Her breath plumed in shaky clouds, vanishing instantly into the frigid air. The horse, a bay mare with intelligent eyes, shifted restlessly, sensing the tension that hung heavy around them. Elara reached out a trembling hand, her fingers brushing the mare's rough coat. A silent plea passed between them for warmth, for safety, for a reprieve. Then, a sound cut through the wind's howl, the creak of wheels, the measured beat of hooves. A wagon. Her heart leaped, a frantic bird trapped in her chest. Was it them? Or was it the buyer? She hadn't expected him so soon, if he came at all. The man who had sent word through a third party, interested in a strong workhorse. She shrank back into the shadows of the barn entrance, pulling the shawl tighter, trying to make herself smaller, less visible. The wagon drew closer, pulled by a pair of solid draft horses. It was simple, sturdy, built for harsh travel. The man driving sat tall on the box, a figure etched against the bleak sky. He was a stranger. This was the buyer. He reined in his team a short distance away and dismounted with an economy of movement that spoke of capability and self-reliance. Tall, broad-shouldered under a heavy coat, his face was shadowed by the brim of his hat, but what she could see was grim and unyielding, etched with lines that suggested a life lived under a harsh sun and unforgiving skies. He didn't look towards the barn immediately. His eyes, she felt, were assessing everything of the land, the condition of the small homestead, the silence that was too heavy. He radiated a quiet intensity, a stillness that felt more potent than any bluster. He was not like the men who had been circling. There was no easy smile, no calculating glint in his eye, just a deep, watchful calm. He was here for the horse. He was here for the transaction. He was here for a piece of property, unaware of the fragile human life tied to it, trembling in the cold. He walked towards the corral, his boots crunching on the frozen earth. He moved with purpose, not rushing, taking his time. Elara watched him from the barn doorway, her breathing shallow. He reached the corral fence and leaned on it, his gaze fixed solely on the mare. He whistled softly, a low, melodic sound that seemed out of place in the stark landscape. The mare's ears twitched, turning towards him, but she remained wary. He spent a long moment simply observing, his head tilted slightly. Elara could feel his focus, a tangible thing. He wasn't just looking, he was evaluating, measuring strength, spirit, potential. He didn't speak, didn't call out to her. It was as if she didn't exist, or wasn't relevant to the primary purpose of his visit. This detachment, while intimidating, was also strangely less threatening than the predatory attention she had grown used to. He was interested in the horse, not in her. Relief, thin and fragile, intertwined with a fresh wave of anxiety. What if he didn't like the mare? What if he didn't think she was worth the price? The price that meant everything. He pushed off the fence and walked around the corral, circling the mare slowly. She followed him with her eyes, her stance still hesitant. He stopped again, closer this time, and offered a gloved hand, palm open, towards her muzzle. The mare hesitated for only a moment, then stretched her neck, sniffing his hand cautiously. A silent exchange. He stroked her nose gently, his touch firm but not rough. Elara saw the subtle shift in the mare's posture, the slight easing of tension. He knew horses. He finally turned from the corral, his gaze sweeping the small yard, then settling on the barn entrance where she stood. His eyes, when they met hers across the distance, were a cool, assessing blue-gray, clear and direct. He didn't smile. He simply waited. It was her cue. She pushed herself away from the barn wall, her legs shaky, and walked towards him, trying to project a strength she didn't feel. The wind whipped her shawl around her, stinging her exposed cheeks. "You came." Her voice was thin, barely a whisper against the wind. It sounded younger, more vulnerable than she intended. He nodded, a slight dip of his head. "Said I would." His voice was deep, resonant, quiet. It held no inflection, no warmth, but also no menace. It was simply a statement of fact. "The mare," she began, gesturing weakly towards the corral. "Is she?" He looked back at the mare for a moment. "She's got good bone. Look sound." His words were measured, practical. "Hardy stock." He finally turned back to her, his full attention on her now, and in his eyes, she saw something shift. The initial assessment of the horse gave way to an assessment of her. Her thinness, the dark circles under her eyes, the way she hugged herself against the cold despite the shawl, the palpable fear she was trying to hide. He saw it all. He didn't comment on her appearance or the desolate state of the homestead. He simply looked, a long, quiet look that felt unervingly thorough. It wasn't pity she saw or judgment, but a deep, unsettling recognition of hardship. It made her feel even more exposed. He turned back to the mare. "She's worth the price agreed," he stated, his voice even. A wave of relief washed over her, so potent it almost buckled her knees. But it was quickly followed by a fresh surge of anxiety. The price, the money, it wasn't just about him agreeing. It was about the exchange, about handing over the means of her survival. She hesitated, her gaze flickering past him towards the road. "The men," they said. "They need to oversee." Her voice trailed off, the fear making it difficult to speak. His eyes followed her gaze, then came back to her face. The grim set of his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He understood. He understood that the transaction was not simple, that she was not simply a seller. She was beholden. He stood silent for a long moment, the only sounds the wind and the restless shift of his own horses. He seemed to be considering something, weighing it. The stillness he possessed was not emptiness, but a contained power, a deep reservoir of thought and resolve. He reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a thick leather wallet. He opened it slowly, deliberately, revealing stacks of bills. He counted out a sum that looked impossibly large to her, far more than the agreed price for the mare. He held it out to her. Her eyes widened, darting between the money and his face. That's more than," she stammered. "The mare is worth the price agreed," he repeated, his tone firm, leaving no room for argument. "The rest is to ensure the transaction proceeds without complication." His meaning was clear. He saw the threat, the shadow of the men who controlled her circumstance, and he was putting a different kind of weight on the scales. He wasn't just buying a horse. He was buying a moment of peace, a temporary shield. She stared at the money, her hand trembling as she reached for it. Her fingers brushed his skin was rough, calloused, warm despite the cold. He didn't release the money immediately, his grip firm around the bills, his eyes holding hers. It was a silent question, an offering of something beyond the simple exchange of goods and coin. An offering of protection. She couldn't name it. Felt too big, too dangerous, too hopeful. She met his steady gaze, searching for something she couldn't articulate. Trust was a foreign concept, something broken and discarded in her life. Yet, in his eyes, she saw no deceit, only a quiet, weary resolve. He finally released the money, letting the heavy wad settle into her outstretched hand. The crisp bills felt alien, a burden and a lifeline simultaneously. She clutched it tightly, the paper cold against her skin. Just as she did, the sound she had been dreading reached them, the rumble of a wagon. Closer this time, louder. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with panic. Two figures sat on the wagon bench, their faces grim and expectant as they pulled into the yard. The men, the ones who had waited like vultures. They saw Caleb standing there, saw Elara clutching the money. Their faces hardened, their eyes narrowed. This wasn't how they had planned it. Caleb didn't flinch. He didn't move towards his wagon or make any show of defense. He simply turned his back on them, his broad shoulders presenting an immovable barrier, and looked at Elara. His gaze was steady, reassuring in its quiet strength. "Go inside," he said, his voice low, barely audible over the rising wind and the approaching wagon. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a command, gentle but absolute. He trusted her. He was telling her to trust him. Elara hesitated for only a fraction of a second. The fear was still a clawing thing inside her, but facing them alone. She couldn't. Not anymore. She looked at the money in her hand, then at Caleb's back, which remained a solid, unyielding presence between her and the approaching threat. She nodded, a quick, jerky movement, and turned, clutching the money, and scurried back towards the barn, then slipped inside the small, attached lean-to that served as her living space. From a crack in the wall, she watched. The men pulled their wagon to a halt. They dismounted slowly, deliberately, their movements radiating menace. There were two of them, burly, with hard faces and eyes that held no warmth. They stopped a few feet from Caleb, their hands resting casually, but purposefully, near their belts. "Didn't expect you to have company, girl." One of them sneered, his voice rough, directed towards the barn but his eyes fixed on Caleb. Caleb didn't turn around. He didn't speak. He simply stood his ground, facing the corral and the mare, as if the men didn't exist. His silence was more powerful than any challenge. It stripped them of their expected confrontation, leaving them unsure, their initial bluster faltering. The second man stepped forward, his hand tightening on a knife hilt. "The money for the horse is our concern. The girl owes us." Caleb finally turned, slowly, deliberately. He looked at them, his expression unreadable, calm. He didn't reach for a weapon. He simply reached into his coat pocket again and pulled out the rest of the money he had showed Elara, a considerable stack. He held it out, not towards them but slightly to the side, letting the wind riffle the edges of the bills. "The mare's price is paid," he said, his voice still quiet, but with an edge of steel. "This is for your trouble, to ensure there are no further complications regarding this girl or her property." He wasn't offering them the agreed price for the horse. He was offering them a payoff, a bribe, a sum large enough to make them think twice, to make the potential trouble of harassing Elara outweigh the easy money they had planned to extract. The men exchanged a look. Greed warred with their bruised pride. They had come to take what they felt was theirs, perhaps even intimidate Caleb, but his unexpected calmness and the sheer amount of money offered disrupted their plan. The first man eyed the money, then Caleb, his gaze lingering on Caleb's hands, his posture, assessing the potential cost of a fight. Caleb didn't move, didn't urge them. He just held the money there, a silent proposition. Finally, the second man, the one with the knife, gave a short, sharp nod to his companion. They weren't fools. The money was substantial, more than they would likely ever wring from Elara through intimidation. It was easier this way. The first man stepped forward, his eyes still narrowed, and snatched the money from Caleb's hand. He riffled through it quickly, a greedy gleam in his eye. The second man spat on the ground. "She knows not to cause trouble again," he growled, directed at Elara's hidden presence, a parting threat. Caleb said nothing. He simply watched them. The men turned and walked back to their wagon, their movements less aggressive now, more focused on the unexpected bounty. They climbed onto the bench and turned the wagon around, driving away the way they had come, the sound of their wheels fading into the wind. Elara stayed hidden until the sound of their wagon was completely gone, lost to the vastness of the prairie. Her heart was still pounding, but the suffocating grip of fear had loosened its hold. She emerged slowly from the lean-to, stepping back into the biting wind. Caleb was standing by the corral again, facing the mare, his back to her. He wasn't looking towards the road where the men had gone. He seemed entirely unconcerned with their departure. It was as if the confrontation had been a mere interruption, dealt with efficiently and then dismissed. She walked towards him, the money still clutched in her hand. The silence between them was different now, not just the absence of sound, but a silence filled with the weight of what had just transpired. He had faced them for her. He had paid them off. He hadn't just bought the horse. He had bought her a moment of safety, a chance. She stopped beside him, looking up at his profile. His face remained unreadable, etched against the gray sky. Why? The word was small, fragile. Why had he done it? Why risk trouble for a stranger? Why pay so much more? He finally turned his head, his blue-gray eyes meeting hers. They held a depth she hadn't seen before, a quiet weariness and a profound understanding that went beyond words. "Nobody deserves that," he said simply, his voice low. "To be prey." He looked at the mare. "She's a good animal. Worth saving." He paused. Then his gaze returned to her, the implication hanging in the air. The horse wasn't the only one he had seen worth saving. Her throat tightened, emotion welling up, relief, gratitude, disbelief. "What will you do now?" she asked, the question echoing her own uncertainty. With the men gone, and the money in her hand, the immediate threat was lifted, but her life was still a ruin. He looked at her, his expression softening almost imperceptibly. "I came for the mare," he said, "but it seems there's more work to be done here." He wasn't offering charity. He was offering something harder to define: partnership? A temporary alliance? A chance to rebuild? He gestured towards the house, the small, weather-beaten structure that felt more like a tomb than a home. "That roof needs repair before the snow hits hard. The barn needs bracing." He spoke of work, of practical matters, grounding the abstract idea of saving in tangible tasks. It was a way for him to offer help without invoking pity, a way for her to accept it without losing her dignity. She looked at the house, then back at him. The fear was still there, a low hum, but it was no longer paralyzing. It was replaced by a flicker of something else: a determination. A fierce, fragile spark of hope. She had survived. She had been seen. And for the first time in a long time, she wasn't entirely alone. He hadn't ridden in on a white horse, hadn't slayed a dragon. He had simply arrived, seen the truth of her circumstance, and acted with quiet, deliberate purpose, offering not salvation in one grand gesture, but the tools and the presence needed to begin saving herself. And looking at his steadfast profile against the bleak landscape, Elara knew that resilience wasn't about never breaking, but about finding the strength to piece yourself back together, sometimes with the help of an unexpected hand in the wilderness.